Camera's rolling.
Baby, I'm too young to know any better, but I guess I'm just too old to care. I'm waiting on the morning light to clear the air. Now the sky is hung with regret. Letting go that you may flag. All the silence that keep me coming back. I'm the one that you hated. You know, the one you didn't want to believe. The one that you hated. Take a look at it now. I'm the one that you created. The one that you hated.
Hey guys, welcome to Dad Talk today. We got a little bit of a different episode tonight. I've been talking about this over the past week. I want to go over a couple of things before we get into it. I have a guest tonight. I will say, up front, I have seen them testifying on behalf of shared parenting. Been a very big advocate behind this cause, but at one point in time, they realized that they were participating in some alienation, and this has been a good while ago. But they realized, kind of the damage and the consequences that was going on with this, and want to use this and help and in hopes of educating others. And I think this is it's amazing, and it takes a lot of courage and bravery to come on here and to be able to talk about these things openly like this. So let's be respectful. I'm going to get into the story, and I'm probably going to have a few questions. And if you guys got some questions, we're going to bring it up. There's still children involved in this, and there was an ex. So we're going to have a name. It's going to be Marcia. That's what we're going to be going by tonight. They will not be on the screen. But Marcia, how are you doing?
I'm doing good tonight, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing okay. All right. So Marcia, take us back to the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about the relationship, and kind of tell us how this whole thing started, and how we got to where you're going to be talking about.
Well, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay.
Okay. Well, I was married at a very young age, got pregnant and married when I was 17. Was only married barely 2 years. So we were divorced when my daughter was about a year old. And, when I left, I had the attitude of if things aren't good enough for me to stay here, things aren't good enough for my child to stay in any shape or form. And I started right away trying to eliminate him from my child's life. Mostly in the beginning, just saying no, he couldn't see her until we had a court order in place, which took, months and all of that. And of course, my daughter being so young at the time, she was just a small child that she would just go and visit with him every other weekend. We just had the every other weekend kind of schedule. And this kind of rocked on for a couple of years, where I would do as much as I could to keep him from seeing her, although there wasn't much I could do. I knew to keep him from exercising his visitation. She wasn't very involved in any activities or anything like that, but I would not let him know, like, where her daycare was, let him know anything about medical conditions, if she was sick. If she did get sick, I would tell him, no, you can't see her, all of these types of things. Kind of your typical stuff that you hear from most people talking in their stories about being alienated. When she was about 3.5 years old, she came home from her dad's one weekend, and I was giving her a bath. And this was the same evening she came home. And she starts telling me this story about how her dad did something to her. And it was you know, it was not a clear story because you can't understand. 3-year-olds don't tell a story that makes sense most of the time.
Right.
But it was an opportunity for me to take this, you know, to take this story and run with it and say, okay, we're going to end visitation. You're not ever going to see her again. I'm going to take away your parental rights and all of that. So I kind of used that to, even though it wasn't anything, she obviously wasn't harmed. She wasn't upset. It wasn't anything that could ever be shown or proved that anything bad had really happened to her. I just took a very simple little story and tried to use it to keep him from being able to see her. We spent the next year in and out of court, fighting over this. You know, I went to the DA, was trying to press charges, all of these types of things, and hired an attorney, tried to get his visitation stopped or at least under supervision. Anyway, after a while, you know, finally in the end, going to court, having a final trial, the judge said, you know, there's no evidence here that anything happened. There's no evidence that she's been harmed in any way. So we're not going to do anything. We're just going to go back to resuming visitation. So we continued on after that. And I still, for years, continued to try to keep him out of her life in every way I could. But one of the main things that I didn't realize over time until later is how much I had stirred up things within my own family with all of this. I found out recently, or well, I say recently, a few years ago, found out that there were several people in my family that were planning and plotting to commit murder with my ex-husband. I learned several years after all of this happened that my grandfather was basically had to be physically restrained from going and trying to kill my ex-husband. I learned that my dad was even prepared to attack him and try to kill him also, and had to be talked down off of that. He was several hours away when he learned some things that had happened, and someone was able to talk him out of it at the time. But one of the things that was most shocking to me is in the most recent, a few years ago, my mother started telling me about how she had also come up with a plan to kill my ex-husband. And she talked about how she had it completely planned out and knew that without a doubt she could carry it out, but that she finally decided, I guess she said that the thing that finally made her decide not to was that she realized she would be losing her soul. She was prepared to go to jail. She knew she could probably pull the act off, but she felt like she probably would go to jail over it, and she was willing to go to jail. But I think in the end, she backed out of it because she was afraid she would just be losing her, like she said, lose her soul, that she would end up being damned to hell, I guess, is what finally made her decide not to go through with it.
And looking back on this, Marcia, why do you think you took some of those actions and was trying to keep your child away? I mean, I'm sure you've thought about this many times over the years, but why do you think some of that was going on?
Well, in the beginning, well, you have to understand that like I said, that I didn't feel like if it was good enough for me to stay there, for me to remain in a marriage, that it wasn't safe enough for my daughter to stay there and remain, or to have any kind of a relationship. I had just developed it in my own head that he was a bad enough person that he shouldn't have any influence over my daughter in any way. So I saw that I was her only parent, that I was the one who should make all the choices for her and be in complete control of who would be around my daughter and who would be influencing her.
You got a question from Benjamin Boshaw on YouTube. He said, what was the relationship like prior to the marriage and pregnancy?
Well, it was so short-lived. I mean, we only dated for a few months before we got married. And of course we got married because I was pregnant. I knew that if I didn't get married, and of course this was a time when having children out of wedlock was not as common as it is today. It happened, but just not as much as you see today. But I knew that and I knew within my own family that if I didn't get married, that I probably would not have been able to keep my child. I would have had to have given her up for adoption.
Right. Got you. Chris Zedwajowski asked if you had ever been diagnosed with a personality disorder.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. Did you have an attorney going into this divorce?
Yes, when I got divorced from him, yes, we had an attorney, and it was I mean, it was just a regular type divorce. This happened back in the 80s.
Right.
There was nothing for us to divide up. It was just all we had to do was figure out child support. And of course, visitation was set to every other weekend. There was nothing, the divorce itself, there was nothing to it.
Right. Now, when some of this was going down and you talked to your attorney, did he help you in trying to accomplish this? Or did he try to say, hey, we might need to question this a little bit further? I'm curious what his thoughts were on it.
Well, if you're talking about the attorney that I had when I when I said that something happened to my daughter, when I said that he had molested her, or is that what you're talking about? The attorney I had then?
Yeah.
You know, he never did coach me or anything. I think he just assumed that my story was true. And even in the end, when he and I talked in the end, we both agreed, something happened. We don't know what. If something bad did happen, that it either only happened one time, or it was never going to happen again, or maybe something happened that we just never understood the exact story from a 3-year-old about what happened. And my daughter to this day doesn't seem to recall this at all. So I've never asked her about it. As time went on, we just kind of moved on. I didn't question anymore. I decided that if anything was going to happen, that we would eventually find out. And the subject never came up again. There was never any other accusations, never any other stories, nothing. And of course, I'm sure at that point, my ex-husband was very cautious about what he did with our daughter when he did have her. So I'm sure he was very careful to make sure nothing questionable could ever happen to her ever again.
Yeah. We're getting some questions in here. Good questions, guys, and I'll get to those. I just got to ask real quick, Marcia, when talking about hearing, that your family had even talked about killing your ex-husband. What was it like for you when you heard about the murder of John Mast and seeing kind of how that went? As you was telling me that was the first story that kind of popped in my head. I was just kind of curious as to what your thoughts, and similar to that, the Chad Reed case that just recently happened. What are some of the thoughts going through your head when you see that?
Well, it's made me stop and think, like, if the things I had said caused my family to react the way they did, how easy would it have been for me to really convince somebody to eliminate him? So I immediately, my mind goes to the mom is creating this drama, these stories, and inflaming emotions and feelings and hatred towards the father of these children. And I just believe that it's being led by women who are trying to get their own way, because that's exactly what I was trying to do. If I could have convinced somebody of anything to have gotten rid of my ex-husband, I would have done it. I just didn't, probably I was not old enough, mature enough to really understand what it was I was doing, uh, other than probably acting out like a little spoiled bratty girl at the time.
You know, and I feel like our system encourages that. I definitely, agree.
Well,
Uh,
that's what I believe girls are taught. Girls are not taught
Absolutely. Yep.
how to share anymore. They're all being taught, they're little princesses and they can do no wrong and they can always have their way, and that type of thing. I don't know that I was particularly raised that way. I wasn't raised to be a spoiled princess or anything. I just knew I was very independent and I had my own thoughts about how I wanted things to be.
Right.
And I was determined that I was going to have them one way or another.
We got a question from Steve Fody here on YouTube. He said, I have a question. My ex-wife has been alienating my children for the past 10 years with outlandish false allegations. Is there anything that I can say or do to try to get through to my ex to have her realize how bad she is hurting our children? Is there anything you could say to that, Marcia?
I see this a lot, and having progressed through this through the years, and now being on the other side of things, and understanding how badly this does hurt our children. Because believe me, I eventually began to see the effects of what I was doing on my daughter, and I had to finally face up that I was probably the one that, regardless of who was to blame, I was the one that was in control of, could I fix this situation? And the in trying to deal with, women or people who alienate, you know, the best I can tell anybody is you have to see them almost as a child themselves. And what do children need? They need strong boundaries. So you have to be very clear and upfront with somebody about what you're willing to accept as far as behaviors. Um, how do you get someone to see what they're doing to their own children? I don't know. I don't know how to tell you how to see that, other than just trying to be the best example you can, as far as how to treat your children and how to treat your ex. Um, you have to be very straightforward with them. You have to have very clear communication. There can't be any ambiguity about what's going on. And I think it's also important to call people out, especially if there's falsifications and lies. You have to call people out on their lies and when they fabricate things. But as far as, and I see women do this all the time. I don't know that there's anything that we can do, that someone could do specifically in a situation where it's somebody that is they're that close to. In other words, if it's your ex partner, ex spouse, my thought is on this is you have to pray that somebody else will intervene. And I think in helping others to see this. I know it's kind of one of those crazy, how do you get around to that kind of thing? But by helping other people, I believe that there's somebody out there that's going to help your ex. You can't do it yourself. You have to pray that God will bring somebody else into their life to show them that. And you be the best example that you can be to other people. Sometimes I think that for people that are alienators, like I said, they act kind of like an immature, spoiled child at times. And the best way to treat that is with strong boundaries, is to, now I'm not sure where I was going with that thought. Oh, I know what I was going to say, is to almost give them what they want. You know, sometimes for a child to learn why something's not good for them is to give them everything they want. And that's how I've handled some situations, and it has worked. Eric, I don't know what's happening, but I can't hear you.
Sorry, my microphone cut off there for a second. I got you another question here from Matthew Ryan Wright. He said, was attorney instructed to keep the child away?
Well, in the beginning, yes, that was his first thing he told me to do.
Yep.
That was part of the strategy, was first of all, deny all visitation and then wait to see if he would actually do anything. So the reason we ended up in court was because he filed a motion of contempt against me. Because that was the strategy. If I can say, you're not going to see our child because I believe you have hurt her in some way, then it puts the ball in his court. It put the ball in his court. Are you going to push this? Or are you just going to walk away?
Yeah. How did you keep your daughter from missing her dad and keep her from being sad and problems in school?
I didn't.
Yep.
I couldn't. It was a very sad time for her, and I believe that that sadness carried on for a long time. It created a huge amount of strain between us, because once visitation resumed, then I had to look him in the eye when he would pick her up, and that just creates a strained relationship, and that was something that she sensed.
Yeah. Generoso Gallo said, what advice do you have for any fathers going through the legal system currently? I guess he's talking about through like parental alienation, false allegations.
You know, I don't know that I have anything as far as on the legal system, because I believe that the legal system is unfair. It's not equal. We all agree to that. And then, so until the system is changed and we are able to get people to understand why we need equality and how important that is for children. And I don't think it's just important for children. I think it's important for adults too. I think it's important for both men and women to learn to share equally. And of course, I think that if that were the case, if people were just told they're going to have to work things out, maybe they would work things out and never get divorced in the first place.
Winford on YouTube said, at what point did you realize that it's important for children to have both parents? I am a dad going through the same accusations, not seeing my children for 18 months.
You know, it probably came from my daughter when she was a teenager. And she started explaining to me why her dad was important to her. And so I had to finally just see things through her eyes, regardless of how I felt about him, regardless of how angry or how much I hated him or despised him or anything like that. I finally had to just see it through her eyes, that he was her dad, and that's how she saw him, just like she saw me as her mom.
Yeah. Had a question. Did you experience any criminal penalties?
No, because in the court case, when my ex-husband filed for contempt for denying his visitation, that was the end result. As the judge said, I understand that you feel like you had a reason, but there's no evidence that anything really happened. So all's forgiven, and we're going to move forward with like nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
So no, I never experienced anything as far as any penalties or legal actions taken against me for any of that.
I think you touched on this a little bit earlier. And O'Keefe Rogers said, if this divorce was in the 80s, what is your daughter's perspective now on this?
Well, my daughter is an adult and she has children of her own. And she, her dad has stayed single all these years. He is now older, and she has to kind of look after him somewhat. You know how when as adults our parents start to age and we have to start looking after those aging parents. It's not that he's so old that he's elderly and decrepit or anything like that, but he's never married, so he has no one to look after him. And now my daughter's the one that kind of helps him with manage his affairs, I guess you could say. And um, it's interesting because I try to help her know how to look after him. Like, before long, he's going to need to be signing up on Medicare and things like that. But she still feels like she has to, when she talks about her dad, she still has to take the attitude of, "Ugh, dad, that type of thing." It's more like she's afraid of letting me know how she really feels about him, about, that she really cares about him. She tries to make me feel like, I know she's trying to make me feel like, it's okay, Mom, I still love you more than him. I don't want her to see it that way, but I know that she still does. I still try to talk to her about this. I mean, we have talked about this stuff over the years about the problems that we had between the three of us, and the game that we had that went on between the three of us of all the alienating type behaviors and the fighting and everything. And I've tried to calm her down over all that so that she doesn't feel so strained um, for loving her dad. She tries to hide that from me, I think, though.
Okay. We talked about before you came on the show, we knew that there were some of these events that we're talking about that is probably going to get some emotions rising from some people. I've had to set the record straight on a few different people. Marcia, tell everybody why are you wanting to come on and talk about this? Why is this something that you want the world to know? These were some of the actions that I did. What is it that you would like to see happen in coming forward? Because I know this cannot be easy.
I want to help. I've kind of come full circle. There was a point in my life when I hated men. Men were the enemy, right? Um, and then, I was even married and divorced again, and then was single for a number of years. And then I got remarried. I was single for, I don't know, about 19 years before I got married to my husband now. And then this is when, even though I had already changed my attitude towards my ex-husband, my daughter's father, and things were okay between us and everything. When I married my husband that I'm married to now, he has children from 2 previous marriages, and there was a ton of alienation going on there. His ex-wives told us that they had an alliance with each other to keep him away from his children. And as I'm seeing this behavior go on, I'm like, do you know what these mothers are doing to their children? I was shocked. I was literally shocked at what women were willing to do to their own children in order to just hurt someone for no real apparent reason. I mean, they can't even come up with a good reason why they would think my husband shouldn't be involved in his children's lives. So I'm seeing the pain that's going on in kids, and I'm hearing stories from children, adult children, of what they've experienced and the harm that was caused from the fighting that was going on between their parents or the alienating behaviors or anything like that. It's what we're doing to our children, and then what eventually that does to our society overall. I also think that it's harmful to women. That we both understand, we all get that alienation happens both ways. We know that men, given the opportunity, can also alienate as much as women do. But we also know that the majority of the time, women have the legal advantage over men in the court systems today. And I think that it's actually holding women back from being able to, I don't know, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, whether I say reach their potential. I just think that it's not just hurting children, it's hurting women, it's hurting all of us. And I think that the reason we're hurting society is we need our men. We need men in our lives to do what men do, provide, protect, all of those things, create security for all of us. We need that in our country and in our society today. So it's me. It's like, I feel like I started out back in the 80s when this all happened, when all this got started, that I was creating that narrative that I have seen grown into what it is today, where women have such a huge advantage over men when it comes to their children in the legal system. Well, I don't know how much of that I really did contribute to. I just know I was part of that process. Can I be a part of the process going the other direction? And that's where I'm at. That's why.
Haley Lisa said, what was your aha moment that made you realize what you had done and how detrimental the effects would be both to her daughter and your ex-husband?
And I've had a lot of those aha moments.
Yeah.
I don't know that part of it was hearing my daughter when she was a teenager. A lot of it was also seeing my stepchildren go through what they've gone through and seeing the effects on them, and then putting my daughter in their place. You know, these are my stepchildren are were not small children. You know, now they're all adults. But I could see what was going on with them, and I started putting my daughter in their place, and I'm like, a lot of that was just going through it that way as a stepmom and seeing what was being done to other children that really, even though I love them because I'm their stepmother and they're my husband's children, they're not really my children. So you do feel differently about them. But
Yeah.
That was one of my big aha moments, is seeing what was being done to other children and then putting that in my daughter's place.
Matthew Ryan Wright said, did you try to communicate with the father or have a middle ground?
You know, the best way I can describe what I did was I basically gave him what he wanted. And you know, I've tried to stick with the story of my part of all of this. Is he completely innocent? Was he a perfect man? No. He did not want to pay child support. There was a lot of threats coming my direction. And ultimately, I said, you know what? I'm going to let all of that go. And I'm going to let him just off the hook for all of this and let him see her as much as he wants, spend as much time as he wants. I'm going to just give him everything he wants. And that was probably the closest I could say to a middle ground. Is I just made up my mind that I was just no longer going to participate.
Yeah, he had two more questions. He said, how how long did you keep the kid away from the father?
We got divorced when she was a year old, and there was never a time when I could keep her away from him for any length of time other than when the false allegations were going on. And that was around a year or so. But even then, he had some supervised visitation during that time. But there was never a specific time frame that I was able to keep him away from her like I wanted to.
This follow up to that was, do you have any regrets?
Well, every day.
Yeah.
You know, and these are things that still rise up. I have a grandson. My ex-husband and I have one grandson together, and he's now a teenager. But there was a time when we were at a birthday party for him when, I don't know, he was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and my ex-husband was there at the birthday party for my grandson. And I'm sitting there, and at one point I can hear my ex-husband talking to my grandson on the other side of the room. He's behind me, and I can hear the conversation going on. And all those feelings rose up again. It just reminded me of every reason why I wanted him out of my daughter's life all those years ago. And I went home that night and told my husband, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get him out of my grandson's life. And I started plotting and planning and coming up with ideas on ways to get him out of my grandson's life, because I was just like, I can't stand it. I want him out of my grandson's life. I don't want him to have any part of my grandson at all. Didn't want him to have any part to do with my daughter all those years ago. I finally gave up on that. But now I think I have some power to keep him out of my grandson's life. And my husband, after 2 weeks of listening to me, my husband finally sat down and said, you're going to have to come to terms with this. And you're going to have to figure this out, because this is not going to happen. So my husband and I started praying about it. And I finally felt like I basically came to the conclusion, or I don't know how to say it other than to say, I felt like I had kind of a word from God that said, if I would become a positive influence on my grandson, that then God would take care of my ex-husband, and my grandson would become a positive influence on him. It was like I realized that if I could show my ex-husband how to be a good person or be a positive influence on him somehow, that maybe that would help him in some way. So I started looking for ways to become more of a positive influence on my ex-husband. Does that make any sense? It's like I finally had to shift my way of thinking. It's like, what can I do to get rid of him? Instead of what can I do to get rid of him, it was, what can I do to help him? It was that shift of, instead of trying to harm him, how can I help him?
Jason Newell here on Facebook said, Marcia, I first wanted to give you 1,000 high fives for being brave enough to own this and speak about it. That takes bravery and guts. My question is, if you knew that 50-50 shared parenting was the standard, do you think you would have behaved the same way?
You know, I certainly agree that when parents divorce or separate, that they should have 50-50 shared parenting. I do not believe that that is going to stop people from behaving the way people behave. That is something that we're teaching children. That is something that people have learned as children growing up. And I believe that our children will benefit because we are going to teach them how to be kinder to each other, how to share with each other, how to respect others. But the people that you see that are alienating, this is something that they developed early on in their childhood. That's my belief anyway. It's some skewed belief system that they developed early on in their life. And you're not going to be able to change that. A 50-50 shared parenting is not going to change people's behaviors. Should it happen? Absolutely.
You know, I agree. There was something that was going around the community not long ago, something about if you're asking for full custody, you're automatically like engaging in alienation or whatever. And it's just not true. There's going to be some of these guys, if you get in these high conflict cases, that's your only option, because no matter if they're shared parenting, court orders, doesn't matter. The person's not going to abide by it. It's just a piece of paper. When there's no consequences and it's not really, they don't really do anything about it. What do you do? Sometimes that might be your only option. I got another question here from Haley Lisa. She said, do you feel that if a person makes false allegations, they should face criminal charges?
It depends on how far they want to take that false allegation. Are they willing to press charges? Are they willing to take legal action? That's something that we probably don't even realize we do it on a daily basis. People will say stuff about somebody else. I mean, I haven't even been paying attention to comments or anything, but just when you're driving down the road, somebody cuts you off and you go, that so-and-so, that crazy blank, blank, blank.
Mm-hmm.
Those are false allegations. You don't know that person. How can you say that about that person? Maybe they just needed to suddenly change lanes in front of you and they cut you off by mistake. I think that we do that on a daily basis and we don't realize it. When you talk about false allegations, it depends on how far you're willing to take it. Are you making, and there is such a thing as slander, and liable and those kind of things. And there are laws for those. I am all for applying those laws where they can be applied. Are you intending to hurt someone by using false allegations? I mean, what are your intentions? And that's usually the hardest thing to try to prove is what is somebody's intention with a false allegation.
Yeah. Tim Trainer on YouTube said, did you realize that you was doing it, or did it kind of happen automatically?
Did
you really realize what you were doing while you were doing it and the consequences that it held?
Not the consequences that it held. I was intentionally doing it. In fact, there was even a point when I was planning to go into hiding. I was willing to go that far. I was willing to try to assume a new identity and take off and go into hiding. I'm not sure how far I would have gotten or how long that would have lasted, but I did start trying to work on a plan at one point to do that. Did I think I was hurting my daughter? Not at the time. I thought I was protecting her. That's what I really thought. I thought this is of somebody that shouldn't be around children, shouldn't be around my child. So I was willing to do whatever to just get him away from her. And as far as like hurting my daughter, no, I didn't feel like I was hurting her at the time. I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was doing my duty as a parent.
Right. I'm trying to scroll through these. It's over. We're split in the comments, Marsha. I'll be honest with you. You got some that think,
yeah, I'm seeing some of them, and that's fine. I fully expected
we knew
that.
this was going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say, we knew going into this that this was going to happen. Guys,
And that's okay. Let them.
This was for attention or any of that. Let me just say this: who in the world would want to come on and admit to some of these things? And guys, it's easy to live behind glass, houses, because we all have faults and everything. But for you to come on here and do this tonight, I appreciate it. And I hope if there's anybody else out there that is watching this that has also acted in the same manner, please realize what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, for the people that I understand that people speak out in pain and anger, and that's okay. Maybe that's helpful for them to do that. It's certainly not going to hurt me for them to say those things. If it helps them to release, that's fine. I'm okay with that. But I also, you know, I'm also protecting my daughter here tonight. She does not know any of these stories. She doesn't seem to recall what happened to her, whatever it was that happened to her when she was 3. She has no idea that her grandparents were plotting the murder of her dad. I would never, ever want her to know that, ever. And I don't want her dad to know that either. He and I have a decent relationship now. Everything's fine between us. And I would never want to set that back. I obviously don't want to throw my parents under the bus either.
Yeah. Um, Tina Marie got a good question. She said, did you ever attend a therapy as a family or individually to correct the damage that was done and to heal?
We did, there was some counseling that was done years ago when my daughter was younger, never as a family. Of course, I tried to control that. That was another way I tried to control things is I tried to go in and tell the therapist, you need to help me figure out how to get him out of her life. And my poor daughter is left sitting there looking around going, can I just talk to somebody alone? I'll never forget, she would want to talk to the therapist alone. And I would like, no, I don't want you to talk to the therapist alone. I want to hear what you have to say. And I want to control that whole conversation. Now, I have, I have had counseling over the years. I attend church now. I've become involved in my church community and my life has changed. I've turned my life around on a lot of attitude towards all of this. So I feel like I have gotten help and I feel like I have healed and I have done what I can to help my daughter heal. She's also an adult that gets to make her own choices now. And when I see things going on in her life that I think are a result of what happened, I will let her know. I will talk to her about those things and say, I think you act like this because of how the family life you grew up in. You have to remember that I got divorced from my second husband when she was 10, and her dad did remarry one time for a short period of time when she was young. It was a very short marriage. So my daughter has been through three marriage and divorces growing up, all before the age of 10. And I wonder how much of that has an effect on her and just in her beliefs, the way she looks at relationships, the way she is in her own family now with her husband and children. I see how that has all influenced her belief process.
Right. Up Your Food Game on YouTube said, does your guest see a correlation with the rise of feminism and alienation in the last 20 years? Does she have a platform to bring this info to the masses? If so, there will be backlash. I think you kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, Marcia, how feminism is playing into this. I think it's making, I guess, women feeling entitled and like they're automatically supposed to get full custody.
Yeah, and in this definitely,
God, the
it's
PC police is going to be
interesting.
coming.
What?
I said the PC police is going to be coming. You hit this topic, yeah, they'll be all over it. But you know what? It needs to be talked about.
I know.
Yep.
The feminist movement started out. Women, I mean, even my grandmother, when she was young, could not own property. She could not go to see a doctor without without a man making her medical decisions. And that was the thing that women fought for in the beginning was, I want to have my own, I want to be able to vote. I want to be able to own property. I want to be able to make my own uh, medical decision. It was things like that. And then it started being carried too far, because in order to get, I think in order to make their point, had to become so, such a hyperbole. It had to become so exaggerated. And so it has become more and more and more exaggerated. And I grew up in the time when my mother was still at home doing all the cooking and cleaning. I remember watching my mother stand in the kitchen for hours and hours from one meal to the next, and ironing clothes and doing the laundry and keeping the house and all of that. And I remember then the narrative is being taught to me through school, through uh, movies, media, commercials, that women no longer need to be able to have to stay at home and just have the ball and chain, to cook and clean.
Yep.
So then I grew up believing, I can do anything I want. And that's the way women have been taught for years. They can have everything. Well, I'm sorry, you can't. If you try to have everything, something's going to suffer somewhere down the road. I read a book recently. I don't remember the specific title of it. It was something about the lies that my mother told me. And I thought it was a book about, I was going to tell me what my mother had lied to me about growing up. And really what it was the lies that I had taught my daughter when she was growing up. And it was that you could have a career, you could have a family, you could have, kids, you could do all these things, you could have all of this and do it all together, but you really can't. Somewhere something suffers. Either your marriage is going to suffer, your children are going to suffer, your career is going to suffer. So, but at the same time, I also think that the current system of giving women primary custody over the children goes against feminism. I can't even say the word. Goes against it. Why is that? Because it provides women with all this money, all this child support that women get. It's a welfare system. Women never get past being able to depend on that money. They become dependent on that money. And so they never learn to manage their own households on their own. Women cannot work a full-time job and have children at home. I have coworkers that have to stop in the middle of the day to go take care of children. Why? Because they're single moms. They have to stop in the middle of the day to go pick up children. That interferes with my work because my coworkers have to stop in the middle of the day and be gone for 2 hours. Somewhere something suffers.
Xavier Murphy on YouTube said, "Did you ask your ex for forgiveness?"
Not specifically. Probably the closest. Well, no, I'll just have to say no, and that's probably bad on my part. I guess mostly because things are okay, so I don't want to dredge things up. I have apologized to my daughter and asked her for forgiveness. She and I have worked through that. I guess my way of asking for forgiveness is seeing what my daughter is going to have to be doing in the future to take care of her dad and letting her know I will be there to help her take care of him, because I can see it coming with him.
Yeah. I am going down the list. At the end of the day, Marcia, just, what are some changes you would like to see happen in the system? And again, guys, this is somebody I sat there and watched testify on behalf of shared parenting and said this right in front of the legislation. So I know your heart is in the right place and wanting to see this change. But I don't believe shared parenting is the magic solution. I believe it's a dang good start. I believe it's where we got to start. But there's a lot wrong with the system.
Yes, it definitely needs to start there. Child support needs to be gone. History, no more. I think it hurts everybody all the way around. It should be child support should be the exception. I mean, there's a fraction of cases where child support is necessary. I don't see how child support benefits anybody ever.
Yep. Steve Jankowski said, "What steps have you taken to reunite the child and the target parent?" Again, guys, this is, what was it, 37 years ago?
Yeah,
37
close
years.
to it.
But were there any steps that you tried to, bridge that gap between the child and the ex?
No, mostly I just kind of got out of the way, I think.
Yeah.
I think, and yeah, I mean, that's the best way I can say it, is that I probably just tried to get out of the way and let things be the way they wanted to be between my daughter and her dad.
Yeah. And I mean, what was that like, having to relearn that after for so long, trying to block it and thinking like, I've got to keep this away, like to realize that I'm doing something wrong here. What was that process like for you? Because that can be easy. I mean, sometimes we are the worst evaluators of ourselves. I mean, what
Well,
was the process like of having to say, look, I do need to change. What I did was wrong.
well, I'll correct one thing that you're saying. I don't believe at the time I felt like I was doing anything wrong,
Right.
but
Okay. Okay. Yep.
but I did decide that I could change something, that of all the things that was going on, the more I tried to alienate her, the more fighting there was. And you have to understand, she was never, technically, you could say that she was never an alienated child, because I never broke that bond or that relationship between her and her dad. Correct? Right? That's
Right.
what I'm saying. They still had the relationship. I just always fought against it and tried everything I could to break it in every way, whether it was telling my daughter how bad her dad was, to all the horrible things I thought about him, telling her teachers, her coaches, everywhere we went, everybody, it was like, her dad's a bad person. We don't want him around. I never, so I never felt like I'd done anything wrong. And then I finally decided that the only thing I could change was me, because doing all of that created so much fighting between, because if I said anything to my daughter, she would go tell her dad, and he would call me up, and we would have this huge fight and all of that. And I finally decided I was ready for the fighting to stop. And I was the only one who could control the fighting.
Let me ask you, when some of this was going down and the allegations and stuff, I think one of the scary things for a lot of these people when they're experiencing alienation is when accusations and things are being said, that the person making them truly believes it. Was that one
Mhm.
of those things that you truly believed?
Yes, at the
The things.
time, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, I remember reading books about people who had been sexually molested. This is when, this is back in a time when people started talking about things like that more openly, right? Things like that
Right.
happened in the past, but people didn't talk about it so openly. And there were starting to be more and more books about people who were sexually molested and what happened to them and their experience and how to deal with it. I even read one book specifically how to look for signs of people who have been sexually molested. And so I was looking for anything that would give me a reason to run with it and say, this is what this is what he did, this is what he's done, this is why he shouldn't be around my daughter. So I believed all of it without a doubt.
Yeah. What could you say to a parent that was engaging in some of these behaviors right now? And I know there's, again, A lot of times I think they know that it's BS when they first start doing it, but they start to believe their own lies. And I don't know if there is anything anybody can do to wake some of these people up. But is there anything that you could say to one of these parents that might be contributing to some of these same actions, to kind of wake up and realize what the consequences to this might be?
Well, I have done that. I just a couple of years ago, I had a huge career change, and the type of work I did before, I was around women all day long. I worked for women, I worked with women, and basically, I was in a retail type situation, and I would hear a lot of stories and hear women coming in and talking about going through divorce, their children, their ex-husband. I was hearing from women, and I started just trying to ask questions. I mean, I think that you have to get somebody to take a step back. I mean, as far as like trying to help people who are doing it, how do you get them to see? You have to get them to take a step back and see it from another person's perspective. The whole situation of being with my husband now and seeing what he's gone through with his kids, as I call it, the kind of the theater in the round. When you go to theater in the round, you can sit anywhere in the theater but get a different perspective on what's going on the stage, right? You can sit up close, you can sit way back, you can sit on the opposite side, you can sit in all these different areas. And everywhere you sit, you get a different perspective of it all. So people who, when you're in a situation, these alienators, they're so deep and tied into their own thoughts, their own emotions, their own anger, their own pain, their why me, and all of that. You have to get them to take a step back. And the best thing that anyone has ever done for me was to ask me questions. Did you ever think, or how do you think that feels to your children? How do you think that feels, or how do you think that looks to someone else when you say or do those things? Those are the kind of questions you have to get people, you have to ask them questions to get them to step back or say, would you like to know how I see it from my perspective? That's the best way to get a conversation going. And that's how I would try to talk to women, is I'd say, your children don't know the difference between you and your ex-husband. You're both still parents, regardless of how they behave or how you think they behave, how you think the other parent behaves, why you think they're good or not good to be part of your children's lives. And then I would start talking to women about, also talk to them about, can you not learn to be independent yourself? Can you not learn to manage your home on your own? Because I could see, I don't know how many times I've had women say something about not wanting their children to go live with their ex-husband because then they would have to pay him child support. I'm like, they were like, I can't afford to pay him child support. And I'm like, how do you think he can afford to pay you child support now? I'm like, why can't you learn to just support yourself on your own? You're head of your household. You're in charge. You get to make all the decisions about where your money is spent. You get to budget your own money. Why can you not manage your own household as a single household income?
Yeah.
So those are just asking questions, trying to get people to see things from a different perspective, which is what you're with what you're doing on your podcast with Dad Talk. That's what you're doing. You're saying we're looking at things from a different perspective. Your dads are talking about, this is my perspective, and we need to hear that.
Absolutely. And I think for so long their voices have been very silent. Nobody listens to them much anymore. So, we're going to continue to try to raise that awareness. And then, having shows like this tonight, like I said, we knew it was going to go in a direction that probably never seen. But I want you to think about this right now as a community. If we could have more people step forward like this, We're not. We're no. Nobody's happy at the actions that was taken. But if we can have more people start to realize, I do not believe that all alienation is mental health. I believe this system, feminism, there's so many other things that have encouraged alienation to where people honestly think that they're in the right, kind of like you were talking about, Marcia.
Well, it's all a complete lie. It is. I mean, feminism is a complete lie
100%. Yeah.
to women. It's a lie that women have come to believe. And that's my job now as a woman to shed light on that, to say, no, we need men. Why do we need men? How do we need men? And men are not typically wired to talk emotionally. We as women, that's part of our job, is to pull the emotion out of men and to get them to connect their emotions. And that's why it's been so hard to get this movement to move forward, is because men, typically about the only emotion you see from men a lot of times is anger. And from women, what do you see? Oh, poor me, I'm crying, I'm going to cry about it all.
Yep.
But the way you're making it work, Eric, is that you're really tying the true emotions of how, and not just how it's affecting dads, but dads talking about how it's affecting their children. This, I can't emphasize this enough, about how much we don't know what we've done to our own children. And that is the worst guilt anyone will ever have to live with, is when you realize later on, if you're ever capable of doing that, what you've done to your own children. And we all have to take responsibility for our own actions. We all have to finally admit to our part in the situation. And that's the first thing anybody can do to help with any situation, is to admit to your part of it and to look for ways to change that.
Absolutely. And I think that's, that's in each and every single one of us to have that ability to kind of look on the outside and see where that improvement needs to be. I mean, I know what there's lots about this story that I know what that's like. It's been 3 years for me. And I remember what it was like being told, like, to see your child and you have to come, like, sit up under me or be supervised. Like, for what? For what? And how does somebody, just because you're the opposite sex or you gave birth, how do you have that type of control to keep me away from my child like that? That's why I started this thing, Marcia. None of it makes sense.
No, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. And nobody we shouldn't even have to be doing this right now. But I think it's, again, thank you for your bravery and your courage for coming out and speaking about this. Obviously, what happened was not good. And there's nothing that we can do to reverse that from 37 years ago. But I thank you for having the courage to go and say this in front of the legislation, because they need to hear it. They think that when we go up there that we're just a group of angry dads that do not want to pay child support. That's honestly what they think about us when we're going and asking about shared parenting.
That's
It's
part of
challenging.
the narrative. It's like the
Yep.
term deadbeat. I cannot stand that word. That is a marketing phrase. That was a marketing phrase that was used to perpetuate the child support system in Title 4D. It was it was nothing more than a marketing concept, was the deadbeat dad. It is totally fabrication. Now,
No,
are there, and I don't even like to say it, that are there deadbeat parents? Well, there are just parents out there who can't parent. I'm not going to say they're deadbeat.
yep,
They just can't. And so the rest of us are here to fill in those gaps. There are people that are here to fill in the gaps for those children who have parents who cannot take care of them. But to use the term deadbeat, I can't tell you how much that crawls up my back to hear someone use that term deadbeat. It is nothing more than a marketing term to perpetuate a system that states
absolutely.
profit from.
If you don't go and hire this attorney, if you don't go through this system, if you don't spend every dime you got, if you don't mortgage your house, you're a deadbeat. You don't want nothing to do with your child. They have equated parents to paychecks.
That's correct.
Absolutely. Marcia, thank you so much. We've been going a little over an hour now, and again, I just wanted to say thank you. And we might need to call on you again later on when some of these committee hearings go down.
Anytime. I'm happy to, because I mean, I guess if that's the only way I feel like I can right the wrong, I guess I'll do what I can.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you next Monday. We'll be live with Kevin Hickey, and I will be back on Tuesday with UFC Hall of Famer Tito Ortiz. Marcia, thank you again.
Thank you, Eric.